And we're live. Hello, everyone. Hello, friends. I hope you're having a wonderful Sunday so far, wherever you may be in the world. And welcome to another episode of Tea Time Talks. Today, I'm so delighted to say that I'm joined by Spanish football journalist as well as LaLiga TV colleague Andy West. Andy, first and foremost, how are you? It's been 6 weeks now of lockdown here in Spain. You're looking well, I have to say, but how have you been handling it?
I am well, thank you. I've had an unusual lockdown in that I moved house.
That's right, I forgot to ask.
Which wasn't really part of the lockdown plan. Actually, it was all planned. We had to move because the place we were in, we rent, and the place we were in before, the landlords decided they're selling it.
Oh, wow, okay.
So we started to look, and this was all before lockdown, found somewhere, agreed the contract, signed it, etc., set the date, and then lockdown happened. But the problem was we'd already got the date for moving. We'd already given our previous landlords the date for leaving, so we didn't have a contract to stay there. But fortunately, it was all happened, and bizarrely, it was the easiest move I've ever had in the end. So I spent a lot of lockdown packing boxes and moving things around. So I've been busy in lockdown.
Well, listen, that's almost like the best thing you could ask for. You've got all the time in the world to properly move house and unpack, which is something that all of us, whenever we do make a move like that, we usually complain we don't have the time to do it.
Exactly. We don't have that get out.
Where are you set up now then? What part of Barcelona are you living in?
Castelldefels, which is
Castelldefels. Okay.
Yeah, it's just outside. For people who know Barcelona, it's just the other side of the airport from the city. So
you're a neighbour of all of the Barcelona players.
Yeah, they're just popping round in a minute. Actually, I'll bring them in if you like. It's a lovely place. It's near the beach. It's near enough the city that it's easy to get in, but it's out of the main city centre. So yeah, very, very happy here, and it will be even happier when we can actually go out.
Yeah, absolutely. Is that where you were living before, or is this a completely new move for you?
Okay. We were there for 3 years, so just moved a kilometre down the road, so know the area.
Oh, fantastic. Brilliant. Well, why don't we talk a little bit about your beginnings and where you're from, because as we well know, you're from England originally, but you've been living in Spain for quite some time. But in England, as we all know, right? I mean, football is very much a religion over there. It's almost like de facto you have to become a football fan if you grow up in the UK. But what is your particular story as to how you fell in love with the beautiful game, really?
My dad, he was a huge football fan, played when he was young, always went to watch games, and he was an active fan. So there's a great family story that I was born in a place called Stockport, which is just outside Manchester, and he was a season ticket holder at Old Trafford at the time, at Man United. I was born on a Saturday, which was a match day, and in those days it wasn't common for fathers to actually attend the birth of the child. So, at least in the UK. So I was very considerate to my dad's football pack. That I was born at about 8 o'clock in the evening, so he was able to go and watch Man United beat Wolves 3-0, and then come to the hospital and see me, and then get home in time to watch Match of the Day. So I was very obliging from the beginning.
Wow, you were born in a football sandwich, if you like. I mean, that's a brilliant story.
Yeah, exactly. So from an early age, he was obviously always exposing me to football, and we used to go and watch. And I'm unusual that I don't have a team that I'm not a fan of.
Really?
And that's because we moved around a lot. So I lived in 6 different parts of England by the time I was 9.
Wow.
But wherever we lived, we would always go and watch the local team, because my dad was really into actually going to football. So my first game was at Norwich at Carrow Road when I was 4. And after that, had a season ticket at Leicester when Gary Lineker was just coming through.
Oh, nice.
I was a member of the junior fan club, and there was a Christmas party where they came and all the players came and they took photos, and on the match day programme after that there was a photo with me sitting at Gary Lineker's feet. So
that is brilliant.
It's a city memory.
Oh, that's a great story.
And then later on, we moved to the south of England and ended up supporting Southampton. And that was a team that I followed most because we stayed in that area. So for years, I was a Southampton fan, and that coincided with Matt Letizia. So he was obviously my hero, and that took me into adulthood. And then I was really a Saints fan until becoming an adult. But then I started working in football, and obviously because of that, I couldn't go and watch Southampton, and really lost. They're still the team more than any that I will follow, but I couldn't really call myself a passionate fan of Southampton now. So, yeah, I'm a bit of a chameleon in that. I don't have a team, which a bit of a heresy as far as some people are concerned.
I should say, you definitely don't want to tell people in England that, because, my God, you'll get a bollocking for that, I would imagine. But perfectly understandable given your background. You mentioned getting into professional football as obviously a journalist, and your first major gig, if I'm not wrong, was whenever you were head of media at Reading Football Club, right? Which is just about half an hour outside of London, something like that?
60, 70 kilometres west of London. Okay. So if you head straight west out of London, towards Wales, then it's on the motorway, about an hour, is Reading, a town of 500,000 people, maybe, and historically not a big football club by any means. And I got the job there. I was working in London at the time in PR, but I had always wanted to work in sport. Just nothing had come up. But my parents saw because they lived near Reading, and they saw an ad in the local paper for the programme editor at Reading Football Club. So I applied for it and got it. And started working there, and everything went from there. And I was really, really lucky, because when I joined Reading, they were in the old Division 2, I think it was called at the time, basically the third tier of English football, and they were near the bottom of it. So they were not a big club at all. But just about a year after I joined, and a year of really bad football, Alan Pardew took over as manager. Nice. He really got things moving and very quickly took the team forward. And within a few years, we were in the Premier League, which was amazing. It was the first time in Reading's history that had happened, which allowed the club to grow. And also, because of the department I worked in, it was just at the time, so showing my age, I joined Reading in 1998. And that was just the time that the internet was taking off. So when I joined, the media department was me. I did everything. I wrote the matchday program. I dealt with the media inquiries, which there weren't many of, and it was just the local press, basically. And I wrote the website content, which in those days was just one story every couple of weeks, some corporate announcement type of thing. But very quickly, the internet became massive. And so by the time we were in the Premier League, it was a whole department that because I wrote with it, was able to run. And it was just a much bigger experience. And I was exposed to everything within it. So I wrote for the program and for the website. I looked after the media and all the internal stuff as well. And just really lucky that all of that was outside my control, that Reading had such a good time going up to the Premier League, and that I was in that department where everything was happening.
You seem to have impeccable timing with whatever local club you seem to be surrounded by or affiliated with throughout your entire time of living in England.
That's true.
And also,
I should use that. I should say, if you want success, hire me.
Exactly. If you want success, I seem to be the lucky charm for a lot of these clubs.
Yeah. But I should add, before I left Reading, they got relegated. So I ruined
It's because you were leaving, though.
We can claim that.
You can claim that.
Yeah.
So, anyway, it was like a baptism of fire then for you. You become basically a jack of all trades, which is something so unusual, I think, in our industry, especially in the UK or in the US. It's more, I think, similar to the kind of journalism that we have in Spain, right, where you need to be able to do a lot of different things. So I imagine that would have made
back to that. Do you think? I think it's come back to that now, that people, with the way the world has evolved, especially in terms of technology, that young people especially are expected not just, if you want to be a journalist, you're expected not just to be able to write, you're supposed to be able to film as well and know how to edit and how to do podcasts, etc.
Yeah.
So I think it's sort of returned to that, but it was unusual at the time. I'm not even a qualified journalist. I never studied journalism. No, I learned it all on the job at Reading. Where, for example, with the match day program that I wrote and edited, if we had a midweek game on the Tuesday evening, then the deadline was first thing Monday morning. You had to finish everything, and there'd be a game from that weekend to review. So you had to go in Monday morning, write the match report, phone the manager, get his comments for the manager's page, write it all. There was a big time pressure. So in that environment, it was quite. It was a really great learning curve, and as I say, I was exposed to everything, including commentary. That was how I got into commentary.
Okay.
The chairman of Reading, the man who owned the club, he doesn't anymore. He sold it. It was John Medeski. There's the stadium named after him, Medeski Stadium. Yeah. Who's a you'll know the Auto Trader magazine.
Yeah, of course.
He invented it. He founded that.
Oh right, okay.
But he was from Reading, and initially it was called the Thames Valley Motor Trader or something, because Reading's on the Thames, the River Thames.
So it's more of a niche sort of.
The Thames.
Yeah.
So he started it off just as he had this idea for buying and selling cars, and he started it off locally in Reading. It did well and ended up making him something like 300 million, I think he sold it for.
Incredible.
And he decided to buy his football club, which was his local football club. And he was a real entrepreneur. Probably still is. He's probably about 80 now, but he's a real open spirit. Would try everything. And so when he was a football club owner at Reading, he decided he wanted to own a radio station. He quite liked that idea. So he built one. In one of the corners of the stadium. He built studios, and obviously as part of that, he gave this new radio station the rights to broadcast the Reading games, and he then decided we need someone to commentate on these games. What about that?
That's going to be you.
Yeah. So I got with like a day's notice, you're doing commentary tomorrow, and that was how I started doing commentary.
That's great. I mean, sometimes it goes to show you don't necessarily need to have a background in studying journalism to be able to do really good and proper journalism as well. You learn by doing it. It really is such a vocation where you have to learn by doing it. But anyway, to go back to to commentary, we actually have a question from you from Fabul, who says hello, by the way, and wanted to know which game was your most memorable game while you were in England and why. And it could be either as a commentator or it could be just as a football fan.
Well, the one game probably that meant more to me than any other was when Reading got promoted for the first time. In terms of professionally, it was the thing that allowed me to be exposed to so much more. And it was in 2002, and they were still in the third tier, but this was the Alan Pardew team that he developed. And it was really dramatic, actually. It was the last game of the season. Top two went up automatically, and then 3 to 6 go in the playoffs. Reading was second, a point ahead of Brentford, and the final game of the season was Brentford against Reading. So it was basically a playoff final for automatic promotion. And Reading got the draw, an equaliser 10 minutes from time. A guy called Jamie Curitan scored, he's a bit of a legend in England. I think he's about 45 and he's still playing. He scored about 1,000 goals. He's amazing. And just a real goal scorer. He scored this brilliant goal that got Reading promoted. And without that, my life would have been very different. No doubt about it, because that was the thing that took Reading up, and from there laid the foundations for them to then go up again into the Premier League. And it was so tense that afternoon. It was also about 3 weeks before I was getting married. Oh, wow. So an important time personally as well. And that was just an unforgettable day. It was the first time I'd been involved with that kind of success as well, getting promoted and what it led to. So that's an easy one.
The celebrations all around then, professionally, personally, that's really nice as well. Yeah. So once you left Reading though, then is that when you came out to Spain, or was there an intermediary step in between?
There was. It was. I left Reading in 2009, and I left because I'd been there for 11 years and it was wonderful, but I felt I'd done it.
Yeah.
I didn't feel I was going to get any more out of it. It was a long time to work in one place, 11 years. And also I had two young kids at the time. And when you work for a football club, you work office hours, normal 9 to 5 kind of hours during the week. And then you work weekends for the games.
Yeah.
So really I wasn't going to see any of my kids. So that partly for that and partly because I felt I'd done everything I was going to do at Reading. And I'd always liked the idea of freelancing. So that's what I did. I left Reading and to freelance. And I did, through the contacts I'd made at Reading, I was able to get a good amount of work in different kind of things. So I did some commentary, some journalism. I did some PR work for clubs and like the FA. I worked for the English Football Association during the World Cup in South Africa. While most of their staff based at Wembley Stadium were out in South Africa, so they needed people to cover the actual office. So I did that. So I did a few things like that. So it was 3 years between me leaving Reading and then moving to Spain.
And what brought on the move to Spain? Because there's also something quite unusual, I think, especially for journalists in the UK. At least this is my perception, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but people try to stay in the UK and to build a career in following the Premier League or the Championship.
Yeah,
so it's quite interesting that you decided to deviate from that path and say, you know what, I'm going to go to Spain, I'm going to become a Spanish football journalist. I mean, what brought that on? Well,
I was never really on that path anyway, because I was I didn't study journalism,
right.
And even when I left Reading, the work I was doing wasn't the more traditional journalism. I never worked for a national newspaper in the UK. I worked with them when I was the press officer at Reading, so knew how it all worked, but I was never on that path. So I suppose it was easier in that respect. But actually, it was the reason we moved to Spain, to Barcelona, was my wife's job.
Oh, okay.
So she works in PR, in comms, and she worked for a multinational agency. She worked in London, and one of their clients was based in Barcelona. They were looking to build the Barcelona office, and asked her if she'd be interested. And we thought, well, we both always liked the idea of living abroad, just for the experience. And our girls were at the age where we thought it'd be a great experience for them as well. They were 3 and 5 at the time.
Oh, it's perfect timing, yeah.
Yeah, so we thought, it's being given to us on a plate that we can just go and do this. They made it easy, that they paid for the move and all that sort of stuff. So we thought, we'll do it. We'll go for 2 or 3 years and then come back. And
that never happens whenever you come here.
Yeah. So yeah, that was 2012. And I, at the time, didn't have any work. So I was going from the freelance work I did in England. I didn't carry with me, because obviously I was moving to Spain. But as you say, I thought it's not a bad place to go. If you want to be a freelance sports reporter, especially football, then go to Barcelona at the time that the Pep era was just coming to an end. Then, what a move to make. So I made that move and gradually started to pick up work.
Yeah, here we are all these years later, 8 years later, and you work for the BBC, which is amazing. You work for, was it 360 Sport out of India as well?
Abu Dhabi. But
Abu Dhabi. Okay.
Dubai. But and they're interesting. It was a newspaper. They've recently gone just digital, which is the way of the world now. But they're also looking to do, and I think that's something that we probably won't have time to go into all this about how you cover sport, how you report about it. There's so much clickbait now, and the rush to be first. That to have the news first, to break the news is always such the pressure for that. But they're taking another approach, which I think is really interesting, to be more reflective and try to give the kind of content that needs a bit more thought and analysis, rather than just, we want to be first. Yeah. And when you're not tied to a print deadline of having to produce a physical newspaper, then you can do that. You have freedom basically to do whatever you want. So,
and also the danger of clickbait too in trying to be first is that you don't have time to even corroborate the stories. So a lot of times, even I myself have been guilty of this at some point or another in the learning process, where you think the news is accurate, you're assuming it's accurate. And
Yeah.
so you go ahead and you repeat that information, or you share that information that later turns out to be incorrect. And
Yeah.
that's part of the problem of creating this whole misinformation and everything else, in trying to be the first person to break the news, rather than actually holding off a little bit and saying, no, I'm going to wait until this really does become official and we've got the proper information to share with everybody.
Whoever you're working for, they have the pressure that gets placed onto you to be the first. And so there is this rush to get the news out there, whether it's true or not.
Yeah.
And so the amount of complete fabrications there are. I did this as I don't think I've ever admitted this publicly. I don't think anyone will care now. But notice this years ago, this became an issue. It's more and more so now. The more we have social media and digital news sources, but we noticed that when I worked at Reading, that the local paper, one of the local papers that doesn't even exist now as a newspaper, it's how things have changed. They would print any kind of transfer. It's transfer speculation.
Transfer rumours are always a problem when it comes to this.
It's anyone wants any news, any transfer news. So whether it's true or not is basically irrelevant. They just want the transfer news, even if it's not actually news. So this particular newspaper there was a message board. Do you remember message boards?
Yeah, of course.
It would be a website devoted to a particular topic. Yeah. So there was one for Reading Football Club. And this newspaper would basically go on the message board, whatever rumour they saw on there, they'd print it as latest speculation is that so-and-so and so-and-so. So I was telling a friend of mine this, and he was like, no, it can't be that simple that they just go on a website and get their news. And I said, it is, and I'll prove it. So I said to him, you go on this message board tonight. I'm going to give you a rumour about one of our players. I'm going to make up a story about one of our players that looks maybe possible. So it was a Scottish player called Jim McIntyre. And I made up that, I don't know, Dundee or someone had been watching him and he was negotiating a move. And so my friend wrote this, put it on the message board. 2 days later, it was in the paper.
Oh my God.
And that's how
that's incredible. That's incredible. I mean, I think that's true. Even in Spain too, I mean, they really love the whole transfer rumor mill. And even now during the lockdown, the transfer news has been incessant. They're still selling all of these stories that are completely false, but it's just because people are thirsty for it, you know? Sorry, what was that?
Let's talk about Neymar and whether he's coming to
Exactly, about Neymar or Coutinho or Mbappe or whoever. And it's like, this is really not the time for that, because there's so much uncertainty in general in the world. There's no way of even knowing what's really going to happen. But anyway, enough about transfer rumors. So how did you find building a career out here in Barcelona? As you say, it coincided with the end of the Pep Guardiola era, the changes with Barcelona, but you've obviously built a great name for yourself over here over the years. And how did you manage to do that?
It was really just through the contacts I've made when I worked at Reading. You know, I was there for 11 years, and all the different things that we did during that time made me a lot of contacts that I then was able to go to later on. And pretty much every piece of work I've ever done as a freelancer has come from someone I've known from that contact. So, you know, as a freelancer, you've got to work your contacts. That's one of the first things you have to do. And you have to be proactive as well, which is something I really like about you doing this, that you're being proactive. It'd be very easy to just sit at home and think, oh, got nothing to do and can't work, wait till this all passes. But you're having an idea, using your initiative and being proactive. And I think in any profession, especially as a freelancer, that makes a massive contribution to how successful you're going to be. So that's something I've always tried to do, have initiative and be proactive. And gradually, bit by bit, I've found opportunities and then try to make the most of them.
And you've also created a great opportunity for yourself by writing a book. and about none other than Lionel Messi, right? Lionel Messi, The Art of Living, for those of you who maybe haven't had a chance to read it. And what's fascinating is that you try to take a different approach about looking at who Lionel Messi is, right? More off the pitch rather than on the pitch. And what did you find the most maybe interesting about the whole writing process and about creating this book?
I suppose the most challenging thing was actually nailing down the actual idea of what I was going to do, because I had this vague idea for years. I'd said I want to write a book, and I'd like to write more books in the future. Right. And it came to a point.
Do you have any ideas? Sorry to interrupt for a quick. Do you have any ideas of any books coming up?
I've had a few, but the publishers aren't interested, unfortunately. I had an idea for one comparing LaLiga and the Premier League, and not because there's always this debate which is the best.
Yeah.
So
but you can't really compare it because you need certain criteria, and also they're so different. That would be really difficult, It's like so Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo, apples and oranges. But
it came to the stage where I thought, if I'm going to write a book, just write a book. Stop saying I'm going to write a book, and just do one. But then the question was, well, what? And I had this idea of, it was just, remember the last World Cup, Argentina needed to win their last qualifier against Ecuador, wasn't it? Away from home, where Ecuador play at altitude, and it's notoriously difficult to win there. And after about 30 seconds, Mascherano made a bad mistake. Ecuador scored, and they were 1-0 down. And if they hadn't won, they would have been eliminated. And cue Messi, who came and scored a hat-trick. They won 3-1, and they went through. And it was just that time that I was thinking, what am I going to write about? And that match, his achievement in that game, made me think how impressive it was that he stepped forward at that time. He took responsibility, basically put the country on his shoulders and said, I've got this. I'm going to be the one to take my team. And it was at the time where Brexit was happening and Trump and all that stuff in the world. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice if our leaders showed that level of responsibility to take things on them for themselves? And from that, the idea came, well, maybe Messi is not just for the way he plays football, but we can all learn something from him in our lives. So that was really what gave me the idea for Lionel Messi in The Art of Living, trying to relate what he does on a football pitch to our own lives. So, for example, there's a chapter on creativity, because he's an incredibly creative player. It's not just that he's technically amazing, it's that he has this vision in his head that if you're watching him and you pause the video, you can't guess what he's going to do next, because he has this creativity. And increasingly in our lives, we need to be creative with the way technology is changing the world. So what does that tell us about how creativity can be applied to everyday life? And there's another chapter on losing, because even arguably the best footballer of all time has lost a lot. And talking about Argentina, obviously there's a long string of heartbreak with them. So even the best in the world, maybe the best in history, has had to accept the fact that you don't always win. And if he doesn't always win, we're not always going to win. So how he's come to terms with losing, and how we can learn from that. And that was what I tried to do throughout the book, because there was no point just writing a biography. You know, there's already Guillaume Balaguer has already written a great biography. There's no need for another one. So I didn't want to just try and, there would have been no point. So I wanted to do something different, and that was the result. Yeah. But the hardest thing was actually nailing down what was going to be in the book. And once I had that structure, it almost wrote itself. The actual writing was easy. It was the deciding what was going to be in each chapter, how each chapter was going to be structured. That probably took as long as actually writing it.
It makes a lot of sense. I can imagine writing a book can be a very difficult process and a challenge, but a very rewarding one at the end too. Obviously.
Yeah, it was. You know, and the day that the books arrive and you get your copy of the book you've written, it's a really nice feeling, and because you know you've done it yourself. Yeah. You've got this physical product of a book, but you did it all. And obviously you have help from people around you, but you created that. So it's nice to have that. Because most of the time when we, especially in broadcasting, there's nothing to show for it at the end of it.
Yeah.
There's a broadcast, but then it's gone. There's no physical product.
Yeah.
But so to have this actual book is nice.
And did you ever get the chance to meet Messi or come in contact with him and his people throughout this whole process, or even afterwards? Did a copy of the book land in his hands as well?
A copy of the book has landed in his agent's hands. I don't know if it got any further, but I was in touch with his agent, and obviously I tried to get him to endorse it or a photo or just something, but completely understandably, his agent said, sorry, if there's so much that is written about him and produced about him, if he got involved in anything, he, out of fairness, have to do it for all of them, and he'd just never stop. He'd have no time to play football. So he, as a rule, doesn't get involved in anything like that unless it's something that they feel is negative or they want to take legal action against. So probably the best you can get is that they don't try to stop you. So that was as good as I could get.
So no news is good news in this case then. So
Exactly.
Clearly they're happy with the result as well.
Yeah.
And
Or at least they're not unhappy. So.
Well, I can tell you that you have a very big fan here watching us, Fabo, who has said twice now that you're an excellent author. So he seems to very much enjoy not just your books, but your book, but also all of the articles that you produce as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So now that takes me back to the commentary side of things, because apart from the BBC and all of the other international outlets that you work with, you also work with us, right, at LaLiga TV, as a commentator, as a pundit.
Yeah.
So, talk to me about your experience so far with the channel, what you've enjoyed the most, or, what have been some of the biggest challenges that you've faced and that sort of thing.
Right. Well, I think that the thing I love about commentary is that you're there in the game. We all want to be players, ultimately. We all wish we were footballers. But if you're not, then one of the closest things you can do is to be a commentator, because you live that game and you have to completely focus on it. I really find it tiring to do a commentary, because at the end of it, you've been so focused on the game. You can't. If you're a journalist, you can afford to look around, take your eye off the page for a couple of seconds. But if you're a commentary, you're in it. So it's quite...
And especially if you're doing it alone, which happens on occasion for you, where you don't have a co-commentator.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And you're trying to convey that game and make it... You try to enhance it, try to make it better for people who are watching it. Yeah. So it's an absorbing experience, I'd say. And I always really enjoyed it from that first game at Reading, when I was given, 2 days notice for my first ever commentary. I instantly enjoyed doing it. And so LaLiga TV's been, a couple of years now, is it? The actual channel, yeah. as a channel. Yeah. But before that, they, in the same building, MediaPro have produced for a while English language coverage of not every game, but a number. Yeah, so it was maybe a year or so after we moved, I started doing occasional commentaries for MediaPro. And one game I really remember that could have been a glorious moment in Spanish football history. It was close to being. It was the next to last game of the 2014 season when Atletico won the league. And obviously everyone knows they won the league on the final day at Barça, Diego Godin with the header, right. 1-1 draw, they became champions. But the previous week, they were playing Malaga at home. And if they'd won that game, they would have been champions then.
That's right.
Because they would have had the points they needed. Barça were playing at the same time at, I think, Elche, I think it was. And they both drew their games, which meant the same points, no difference, went to the final game. But I was commentating on that Atletico game against Malaga. So if they'd won that game, I would have been commentating on them becoming champions. Oh, and it was brilliant. There was a moment in stoppage time. Barca had already finished. Their game was already 0-0. So people listening to the radio, everyone knew if we get a late goal, then we'll be champions.
Right.
And Adrian was on a sub, sent a curler towards the top corner, and it would just look like it was going in. And then Willy Caballero, was Malaga goalkeeper at the time, flew to his left and somehow turned it over the bar. And that was the moment that stopped Atletico from becoming champions at home when I was commentating. So it's such a shame that he made that mistake.
So
it became a better story the following week.
Well, true. But so do you have any particular moment that you have commentated on that was historic then in the end, whether it be a goal from Lionel Messi or a goal from anybody else or a team winning, a league title or anything like that?
Well, going back to Reading, there was I was commentating during promotion season. Reading actually hold the English record for points in a game. Points in a season. 106 points they got the season they got promoted. They're unbeaten
promoted to the Premier League.
To get into the Premier League, yeah.
Wow.
2006, and there were 33 games unbeaten between August and the end of the season, or did they lose? Well, anyway, 33 games unbeaten. But at the end of the season, the very last game, already champions, there was one player in the squad who hadn't scored, and that was the right back and the captain, Graham Murty, who's now coach in Scotland. He was Rangers manager for a while. So it became the thing, is Mertz going to get a goal? And then on the last game of the season, it was against QPR, and it was like 3 or 4 minutes from the end. It was 1-1, and we got a penalty. So, of course, he had to take it, and he smashed it in, and the celebrations were unbelievable. So that was a memorable one. In Spain, a memory that instantly comes to me is Messi, and the goal he scored at Real Betis last season.
Somehow I knew you were going to say that.
The chip, he scored a hat-trick in the game, but that chip was... Words failed me at the time to capture that. I think I just said, "Oh," or something like that, because
it just actually left you speechless. You just don't even know what to say. I know.
And that's what he can do. And just the technique to get enough power on it to get it over a 6'4" keeper, but delicately enough that it went up and then gradually down. That was just an amazing goal and a memory. Yeah, a memory of from my commentary. But the most memorable moment I've had in Spain actually wasn't commentary. I was at a game as a writer, and it was the Champions League, the PSG game, the remontada. That just unreal. When Sergio Roberto scored, anyone could believe it. And being there was a special moment.
I can imagine. I still have a stain on my couch from the reaction. I was eating something. I don't remember what I was eating. But I was eating on my couch. I was living in Turkey and Istanbul at the time. Okay. And I was watching the game. And I was just so aghast at the goal that I spilled the plate everywhere and the food went flying. And I still to this day haven't been able to get the stain out of the couch. But it serves as a great memory, for that moment.
It was worth it.
It was worthwhile. If I'm going to stain my couch, it should be at least related to football, right? So, that was a tremendous, tremendous game. That really was. Wow, that's amazing you were there to see it live.
Yeah, it was. It was a privilege to be there. Yeah. And I was writing, so I had to write because you're on a deadline, and I had about 10 minutes after final whistle to get my report in. But I remember at the final whistle, which was almost immediately after that goal, just sort of sitting there for about a minute going, I'm going to write. I'm going to start writing now. That was unlike any other, just for the drama. That was unlike anything, any game I've ever been to.
Yeah, I mean, that one is very, very difficult to top, I would say. So that takes me to another question that is put forth by one of our viewers, by Wes Tucker, and he wanted to know, he says, it's been such an entertaining season before it got cut short. So what was your game of the season so far, and also what was your goal of the season so far?
It has been a great season, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And I really hope we get to finish it because it's been so good. So it's so open still, at both ends of the table, and for the title, obviously, and then the Champions League places, and then relegation. There's so much to play for, so I really hope we get to finish it. The best game, I mean, as a commentator, you always get drawn to the games that you cover, And I go back to the beginning of the season.
Let me guess, Villarreal, Granada, right?
Yeah, very first game of the season, a 4-4 draw. And the thing that amazed me was Granada that day, because I saw quite a lot of them because I do commentary on the Segunda Division as well, and they were a pretty dour team. Yeah. Honestly, the last few weeks of that promotion season, they weren't attractive. They were solid, organised, as they've continued to be. Right. But they would win 1-0 or they'd draw 1-1 and they'd score a scrappy late goal.
They were just defensive, basically, right? I mean, they were just trying not to concede goals, and that was basically the objective. Yeah.
Yeah, and they were really good at it, and they did absolutely. I don't mean to take anything away from them from that. They were very good at what they did, but they weren't an expansive team that played open football. But here they are, their first game at Villarreal, who are a great footballing team, and they're passing it around, 1-2s all over the place. They had 3 or 4 really good chances to score in the first 10 or 15 minutes. And they didn't, and then Villarreal scored, and you thought, okay, they're going to go on from here.
And it was Cazorla too, right? You scored the first one of all people, which is great too, in and of itself.
Yeah, and then they got, I think, 3 goals from set pieces in the end, and it was a 4-4 draw. Villarreal were ahead 1-0, 2-1, 3-2, and 4-2, and it ended up as a 4-4 draw. So
bonkers game.
So that was a great way to start the season.
And also Villarreal, who couldn't hit a barn door last season, really. So all of a sudden, for them to be high scoring too was just amazing.
Scoring, but kept conceding with the new defensive partnership as well. But for Raúl Albiol and Pau Torres, who've gone on to do really well, but they didn't start that well that day. And then another game I remember to bookend that was one of the last games.
Oh, really? Oh.
Betis Madrid. That was just crazy.
That's right.
Lockdown that had everything. I thought both teams didn't actually play well, but because of that, it was chaos. Yeah. It was madness. And then Christian Teo, the former Barca player, with the late winner. It was an amazing game.
That was an amazing game. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also Osasuna, Real Sociedad, 3-4 at El Sadar. That was another bonkers, off the wall mad game that had everything.
Was that where Chimi Avila set himself up for a header?
I think so, yeah. And because he scored the last goal. How did it go? It was like Real Sociedad, I think they had gone 3-0. They gone 3-0, and then all of a sudden Osasuna scored 2. Then it was 3-2.
Then it was 4-2.
Then it was 4-2. Then it was 4-3. And Chimi Avila scored the last one, And Roncaglia also got a red card, so Osasuna were down to 10. I mean, it was just, it was nuts. That game was nuts. But really good fun.
Gotta love Chimi. Everyone loves Chimi.
Everyone loves Chimi.
I want to answer the favourite goal question.
Yeah. Go for it.
Jorge Molina for Getafe against Valencia. Do you remember that one?
This is the long range one, right? From almost the halfway line, is it? No.
No. He was played through, and he got the ball with 2 defenders between him and the goal, and he got his back to goal. So he turned with his back to goal.
Yes.
One way, and he lost 3 defenders by faking. Yeah. They all went that way, and then he just span back the other way, and as he span that way, he hooked it in. And it was an amazing goal for a 37-year-old.
Yeah, I think it's up there, 37, 38. And another one.
And actually, that was from his speed of thought, his brain. He's obviously not that quick at that age, but the way he made that move just was so subtle and so clever. I love that goal. So go and check that one out if you don't remember.
Oh, that one, I remember that. Now you mention it, it was a real thing of beauty. And also, speaking of another veteran scoring goals, Aritz Alurit.
Oh yeah,
first game. Day one against match day 1 against Barcelona. He came off the bench. It was at 88th minute. It was 0-0.
Yeah. And
just out of nowhere, he's in the box alone. Semedo's supposed to be picking him up. He's miles away, and then it's like a half bicycle kick. Oh god, that was gorgeous.
It was amazing way, and again, first day of the season, and a great way to start the season, because it's been that way since. Every week. You look at even Barca and Real Madrid for when they were at their peak. Obviously, they were playing great football. So 7 or 8 years ago, they were playing football of a level that's rarely been seen consistently. And that was great to watch in its own way because they were both just so good. But it's more entertaining now that they're both not as good. But every week you look at them and you think, well, they may not win.
Yeah.
You don't go into those games thinking, obviously, Barca and Madrid are going to get 3 points. The number of teams who've taken points off this season.
And last season too.
Yeah.
Last season was also a real thriller as well. Well,
yeah.
Hopefully it will come back soon. But another question for you from Fabul as well. He said, if you were to write a book on a manager with the same style that you wrote about Messi, who would it be?
Ooh. Diego Simeone is an obvious candidate, but I love him. I think it's amazing how he's turned around that club, Atletico, from being a big club, but not big enough to compete for trophies. And he's made them now. We talk about the big three.
Yeah.
And he did it initially without spending money. And he did it by the force of his personality. He's so charismatic. But also he's clever and he knows how to organise a team. It'd be really interesting to be inside Atletico and just see up front how he works.
Oh, yeah.
And how it must be difficult to play for him.
Yeah.
But at the same time rewarding. I remember when Arda Turan left and joined Barca and said he didn't want to run as much anymore. Which, well, you're a footballer, but you sort of understand it.
But Arda Turan is also a little bit special, let's be honest. He's a little bit, a little crazy. But anyway.
So Cholo Simeone, but I also think it's interesting, is he going to be able to keep on developing Atletico? Because to get, and it's something we've seen this season, to get to that next level with the caliber of players they're bringing in now, like João Felix and Lamar even, those flair players don't really fit inside that rigid, ultra-disciplined system. Can he incorporate players who can play with a bit more freedom? And at the moment, he's not been able to do it. Yeah. His last game went quite well, though, didn't it?
Yeah,
just
I
before.
Think so. Exactly. Just in timing. Well, you definitely have some fans supporting you on writing that book. So maybe you have your material then for the next one.
I'd love to, yeah. In years to come, I certainly want to write more books. Yeah.
Awesome. And obviously, today's I think it's the 119th birthday. Speaking of Atletico Madrid, of the club. So happy birthday to Atletico Madrid and to all of the Colchonero fans out there.
Yep.
Why don't we shift gears a little bit, because apart from all of the football, you also cover a lot of basketball. And in particular, the EuroLeague, which is, I mean, to be honest, like I grew up in the US, right? And I never really was a big fan of the NBA, and I actually am much more drawn to European basketball than I am to American.
Even then, when you were growing up in the US?
Yeah, here's the thing, right? I grew up in LA, and the Lakers were in their prime with Kobe and Shaq.
Right.
I hated the Lakers.
Okay.
I was probably the only person in LA that really did not like the Lakers.
No.
I don't know.
Family thing, in your family they didn't like the Lakers, or?
No, my mom hated them as well. I don't know what it was, but my mom was a Boston Celtics fan because she's from Boston. So she obviously was hugely supportive of the Celtics, which, fair play. When she was growing up there, that was like the dream team, in the NBA. They were phenomenal. So maybe it had something to do with that. Maybe she just kind of
indoctrinated you.
Exactly, indoctrinated against the Lakers, even though that was my hometown team.
That's perfectly normal, yeah.
But anytime they won a championship, I'd be so irritated. Oh God, all those Laker fans again. Oh, they're so annoying. Oh, they're so irritating. But anyway, I was always watching European football anyway, so
right.
It didn't really bother me that much.
You were probably aware from that of European basketball then that.
Yeah, and then
if you're interested in European sport already, because it's unusual for Americans to even know EuroLeague exists.
Yeah, it is. It's true. I mean, and it's understandable. The NBA is amazing, and it's head and shoulders above every other league. But there are some amazing players in Europe that have made their way over to the NBA, and they've laid the foundations in competitions like the EuroLeague. And quite honestly, I think it's a hugely exciting competition. I mean, you obviously know much more about this than me, but How did you end up getting into basketball? Because obviously you'd done football all the way through, your career.
I was never really into basketball as such. I enjoyed it the times I was exposed to it, but it's not a big sport in the UK at all by any means, because we've got, football obviously dominates, but then there's cricket, rugby, so many other sports that basketball doesn't get a look in. So I was working, it was after I'd left Reading, but before I moved to Spain, and I was doing some freelance commentary for a company called Perform, who are a big media group in London. Yeah. And they called me one day and said, we've got a new contract and we need commentators. It's basketball. Do you fancy giving it a go? And I thought, well, why not? Don't really know anything about it, but sounds interesting. So I did. It was EuroLeague. So I quickly learned about it, and then discovered, at this point I knew I was going to be moving to Barcelona quite soon. After a few weeks of doing the commentaries, I discovered that EuroLeague, the offices, are based in Barcelona, where I was moving to. So I thought, well, that could be useful. So I started to make contact with them. I'm one of your commentators, and can we meet when I moved over? And I was able to start working for them. And at the time, all the EuroLeague production was done in MediaPro, where we work, where LaLiga TV is produced. So it was the same building where LaLiga TV is now done. They did all the games, so I started working for EuroLeague, and it's really nice. Football's my first love, and my sports I'm most knowledgeable about. But it's really nice to have the variety, because EuroLeague games, they're not going to clash with the Champions League or with domestic football, because they know they'd lose. So they purposely schedule the games for Thursdays and Fridays. So I'm able to cover both, really, which is fortunate. And it means I get that variety. So I never get bored of football or basketball. I never have got to go and do this again, because I have that break of covering another sport. And I really do enjoy basketball. Something that's really struck me more, the more I've learned about basketball, is how similar it is to football as a sport. Obviously, it's not in some ways, in that games end up 85-90,
sure,
and you use your hands. But basically, both sports are about, if you've got the ball, trying to create space for someone to have a shot in a favourable position. And if you haven't got the ball, it's about denying your opponents that space and getting the ball back as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
That's what they both do. And things like transitions, turning defence into attack, they're so many commonalities between the sports. And Pep Guardiola, when he was at Barca have a basketball team as well. He would regularly, and at Bayern Munich actually as well, they also have a basketball team in EuroLeague. He would spend a lot of time watching the basketball, meeting with their coaches,
really?
Discussing.
I didn't know that as well. That's really interesting.
So the guy who's now Barca coach, basketball coach, Svetislav Pesic, a bit of a legend of.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Basketball. He was Bayern Munich coach at the time that Pep was Bayern Munich coach, and they would spend hours together talking about
fascinating
sports, but because there's so many similarities that you want ultimately your best player, whether it's Leo Messi or Ante Tomic, to get the ball in a good position to shoot with no opponents around him. How you maneuver that tactically is the same, whether it's in football or basketball. So it's interesting seeing that.
It is. I never really thought about drawing the parallels between the two sports before, but whenever you lay it out like that, it makes a lot of sense.
Maybe that's...
Maybe what?
Maybe that's the book.
Well, there you go. Maybe that's the book. Yeah. We're coming up with some great ideas here for you. Before we started getting into the chat, we were talking a little bit about the EuroLeague and the format that it now has and how it's changed in the last few years. And you actually felt that maybe the Champions League could do something kind of similar with maybe a facelift of some sort, right?
Yeah, it's a big topic, isn't it? What people think of the Champions League and the future of European football. Until recently, the EuroLeague, which is the equivalent of the Champions League in basketball, it's the big European competition that Barca, Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, etc., all play in. Right. It was the same, more or less, not exactly, but more or less the same as the Champions League is now. You have a group phase with the champions of the weaker nations, and then the best teams go through, and eventually you get the knockouts, etc. And then 3 years ago, I think it was, the EuroLeague became a league. So the 16 top teams in a home and away format play each other every week, the best against the best every week. So it's
it's like the football Super League that they want to create.
Exactly, which I know a lot of people are really passionately against.
Yeah.
They feel it would rip out the soul of European football, and I do have sympathy for that. And I certainly wouldn't want the Champions League to become a closed league where every year Barca and Man United and AC Milan are guaranteed to be in it just because they're big names and they got a lot of fans. It should be competition based. But I do feel that the Champions League at the moment is far from perfect, especially the group stage. It's largely a waste of time. You know, you look at when the group stage draw is made, you can look at those 8 groups and say, well, they're going through, they're going through, they're going through.
It's too predictable almost.
It is. And the ideal would be to make it more equal. The champions of Poland and Bulgaria, as they used to be in the 80s and before, are much closer in standard to the Barças and Real Madrids, so that the group stages were more interesting in that way.
Yeah.
But if that's not going to happen, then I think teams of a similar level should play against each other. And the best teams should have the opportunity to play against each other more often. You know, when Barca played Liverpool last year, it was the first time they played against each other for like a decade.
Yeah.
Why should they not play against each other more often? So there's a lot of debates to be had about it, and a lot of people are against it. But some modification to the Champions League, I think, would be beneficial. And you know that European football's powers that be are looking at EuroLeague, looking at the basketball model, and seeing how could we do that. You know, Florentino Perez, for example, at Real Madrid, is a really close follower of the club's basketball team.
Of course, yeah.
And he's seen what happens in basketball, that every week his basketball team plays a big game, big European game against one of the best teams in Europe. And he thinks, well, why is my football team not doing that? Why do we have to wait until February to play anyone decent?
Yeah.
So it's not going to go away. And I wonder even whether the coronavirus, the current situation, might be a catalyst in a way that makes clubs think we're going to take this into our own hands and make this happen. We'll see.
No, we certainly will. It's really interesting to see the whole landscape of sports in general, and just to see how things are going to change, especially with football. There's so much debate going on right now.
And we don't know, do we? I mean, we don't when we're going to be covering La Liga again. Hopefully it'll be in a few weeks, but no one knows at this stage, and no one knows how it's going to return if the virus is being subdued now in countries like Spain. Hopefully that will remain the case, but there might be another outbreak that forces us to go underground again, and we'll see. But
which I think is quite probable in all truth. I mean, people are starting to go outdoors now, and Spain being such a social society, people really have to force themselves to not come in contact with people. I mean, you go to the supermarket today, for example, it's a beautiful day, kids are finally allowed to be outside, and the streets are packed. You know, and there's just like groups of people hanging outside of the supermarkets.
Yeah.
So it's a long road for sure. They're talking about a year at least until a vaccine gets made. I think my guess would be that for sure we won't be seeing any stadiums filled with people in the Liga until probably January, February, at least a year from now.
Javier Tebas said, isn't it, yesterday, that he expects that to be the case. It's not perfect, and you want fans to be there, but you know, it's unusual times, so we have to take unusual measures. And for me, behind closed doors games is way better than no games. So
Agreed.
That's the way it has to be, then that's the way it has to be.
And they can always take the approach of, I think, who is it, Borussia Mönchengladbach, I think it is, where they're getting these cardboard cutouts of the fans and they're putting them into the seats. It's brilliant. I love the idea. I mean, it's kind of weird, but at the same time, it's really cool. I love it. So maybe they can find something in between.
Being creative. We'll have to be creative.
Being creative, exactly. So anyway, on that note, I mean, we've been chatting for about an hour now. It's just flown by.
Okay.
Is there any final comments or remarks or anything you want to say before we let you go outside with one of your daughters?
Um, No, really just hope everyone looks after themselves and look forward to the day that football comes back. You know, it's an important part of our lives. And although we're not going to take risks and nobody should do anything reckless to jeopardize people's health, we're all looking forward to the day that we can get back to watching and talking about football. So everyone stay patient till then.
That is very much the truth. Well, thank you so much, Andy. It's been a pleasure. And I'm
Thank you,
very
Semra.
happy
And
to
keep
see.
doing what you're doing as well. Really admire you for it.
Oh,
So
thank you. I really
you're
appreciate that.
an example for us.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm trying to do what I can to keep us all feeling a little bit, positive and optimistic about things and to talk a little bit about football because we all miss it, right? So
Yeah.
thank you for that. And
Right.
thank you to everybody else as well for being with us. As always, it's been a pleasure to have you with us, and we'll be back next week with some more episodes of Tea Time Talks. But in the meantime, stay safe, look after yourselves, and we'll see you very soon. Adios.
Bye bye.